Well, it seems that we've swapped our previous Meta 40k overlords for some new ones. Let's talk about the Tau Empire and the Adeptus Custodes, and why they seem to be demolishing the competition at the moment. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd take a special focus on the top of the meta, where the Tau and Custodes codexes have come out in January, and between the two books it does appear that they're winning the vast majority of competitive events. The two factions are monstrously brutally strong right now, so in this video I thought we'd talk about just how well they're doing, some of the particular strengths of the armies that are allowing them to dominate quite so much, and a few potential weaknesses and potential ways to counter their monstrous strength. So now both of the books have been out for a fair while now, they've both been seeing pretty wide play in tournaments, Tau maybe only coming to the fore in the last couple of weeks, as there's generally a bit of a lag period as to which books you can use at events. In general though, the numbers do paint a pretty convincing picture that they're dominating quite a lot. Their win ratios of games both seem to be pretty comfortably in excess of 60%, I believe the Custodes have got up to 70% at least at one point, and if you look at some of the top 3 placings in a whole bunch of tournaments, it's quite clear that they're having a massive amount of success. I think in general the lists that make it into the top 3 tend to be fairly indicative of what's really strong. You don't get into the top 3 of a grand tournament without having at least a somewhat efficient list, so the armies that are getting there regularly really are the ones that you can be pretty sure are very strong indeed. There's been a whole ton of big events over the past couple of weeks around the globe, and out of the 66 lists that came top 3 in all of these, 19 of them were Custodes, 15 were Tau Empire, accounting for 29% of the podium spots and 22% respectively, adding up to over half the spots in total, and then a lot of the other factions tend to be a lot more fragmented, some of the higher ones being Tyranids, Necrons and Drukhari. Tyranids and Drukhari are certainly still very solid. Necrons appear to be reaping the benefits of some of their chapter approved points changes, things like discounted flayed ones. Often when new books drop, there tends to be a bit of a rush of people running to the new codexes to try out new and fun rules, and potentially get some victories before people get too bored of the factions, so it is possible that there might be a bit of a glut of people playing both factions at the moment. Still though, this certainly doesn't happen for every single codex that comes out. For example, Genestealer Cult really haven't been seeing anywhere near this sort of success. They did drop at the same time as the Custodes book, and Black Templars only had a few sporadic victories. You didn't get sweeping amounts of them being represented in almost every single top spot in every single tournament. There might be a bit of an argument that a lot of people just don't know how to deal with the factions quite as much, the meta hasn't really factored them in yet. I feel like with Custodes about, there might be a bit more of an emphasis on things like damage 3 weapons, and Tau might make a bunch of unit choices feel a lot less viable, maybe things like light infantry. Even so though, on the flip side, a lot of the Custodes and Tau players might be playing just with the models that they have, might not have fully optimised their lists for the most competitive version of them yet, and they might still be getting gradually stronger to come. In any case, for whatever reason, they are absolutely dominating the meta, nothing else is really coming close to either of the factions right now, and I must admit it's a slightly depressing state of affairs for 40k game balance. It feels like we've generally had only a few factions doing well for quite a while, Drukhari, Grey Knights and Tyranids in recent times, preceded by Drukhari, Admech and maybe Orcs for a little bit before that. With chapter approved maybe addressing quite a lot of the old guard and reining them in a bit, it is a bit of a shame to see 2 of the newer codexes dominating to this extent. It just represses a whole load of the field, and it's a bit annoying that they're just quite so out of line. Of course it's going to be interesting to see how the Craft Worlds and the Harlequins factor into all this. Both of those guys are looking potentially very scary indeed. It's going to be interesting to see how much all the theory crafting adds up into reality though, and whether or not they're going to add a third monstrously powerful codex threat into the equation. I'll certainly look forward to watching out for any strong lists from those. Should be fun to talk about on the channel. In any case, let's talk through some of the general strengths of the faction. Custodes first, then let's go on to Tau. So of course Adeptus Custodes are looking generically strong all round at the moment, and I feel like perhaps one of the main reasons that people are playing them quite so much is that they're just a very easy army to pick up and get into. Perhaps along with armies like Imperial Knights, you really don't need all that many models to get a viable force on the table. They can be painted up really quickly and easily if you do just want to get them battle ready, and aside from their Forge World toys, they're really cheap for the points. The Custodian Guard and Virtus Praetors are some of 40k's better deals in terms of just getting points and models on the table for how much you're investing. It perhaps feels a bit similar to in 8th edition, when one of the best things that you could include in an army was a single detachment of Custodes Shield Captains on jet bikes. They were really powerful allies that you could add in to just about any Imperial faction for just the price of one very cheap box, and get some fun and dynamic new models to paint up, and giving you some pretty murderous power on the board. In any case, with the Custodes, I feel that their models are just generally all-round strong. Just quite a lot of their units and choices maybe just cost a little bit less than you might expect them to, and they combine that with some really handy objective rules, and some new layered buffs with their shield companies and martial guitars to really take them to the next level. I did find it really quite interesting that when the Custodes Codex dropped, so many people were lamenting on how it was a downgrade for the faction. They certainly lost a few things, but between some generic stat line buffs and then just adding a couple of layers of special rules onto an army that was already good, and now you've got a faction that's comfortably able to handle the vast majority of armies in 40k. It seemed that they were perfectly fine in terms of strength straight out of their codex, but weirdly enough Games Workshop must have been fed back that they were a bit underpowered, as they decided to almost preemptively buff them in chapter approved that came out the next week, dropping points cost on already good units, things like the Virtus Praetors and Trajan Valoris. In any case, out of units that I think are particularly strong for them, Mr. Valoris and the Shield Captains are particularly good choices. Valoris is arguably one of the strongest characters for the points cost in all of 40k, between massive melee, great command abilities, and awesome defense, pretty much an auto-include in any Custodes army for 160 points. Backing him up are usually one or two Shield Captains. You can make some really stacked builds with them. Generally the go-to ones are the Terminator Captain with Praetorian Plate and Unstoppable Destroyer, meaning that you can just jump into any combats to overwhelm one enemy, and the Dawn Eagle Jetbike Captain with Tip of the Spear for some massive melee damage, and spectacular survivability, often using Superior Creation for a 5+ feel no pain, or an already crazily tanky model with 9 wounds and a 2+ save. Custodian Guard are great units just to slog onto objectives, good defense and melee and a bit of shooting, and if it makes sense given what you're fielding, you could swap them out for Alaris Terminators, Custodian Wardens with their bodyguard ability, or Sagittarium Custodians if you want a bit more ranged threat. Virtus Praetors are just a bit undercosted now that they went down 5 points. They can convert some incredibly reliable salvo launcher shots with things like the Emperor's Chosen rerolls. They're tough for the cost and also pack a devastating charge. It's kind of hard to go too far wrong with them. The Forge World Dreadnoughts are also excellent damage dealers who can do a bit of heavy lifting. The Contemptor Galatus and Achilles are both great, and although I don't think they're enormously mandatory, you can take a few Sisters of Silence along as well. Maybe some cheap prosecutors for objective and action work, or potentially doing their intended role of actually screening Psychic and making it more difficult for your opponent if you happen to be facing something like Grey Knights or Thousand Suns. Backing up these very efficient units are a whole bunch of strong abilities. Pretty much army-wide you have a 2+ armor save, a 4+ invul and toughness 5. You can shrug off most small arms with ease, and with the Emperor's Chosen you can get a 4+ feel no pain against mortal wounds as well, which really should be their Achilles heel. They're amazing at slogging onto primary objectives, as they have been since the start of 9th. Really tough models with massive melee threat. All the infantry are OBSEC including the characters, and count as 2 models for objectives to boot, so you're going to need a pretty serious amount of force to outscore them. As well as that, with the option for things like 6-inch heroic interventions on the cards, it means that you can't really just ping cheap units to take midfield objectives away from Custodes, otherwise they're just going to stand up and hit you. The martial guitars can really come in handy, Rendax can really punish enemy vehicle armies, Salvas could allow you a devastating volley of double-shooting auric weapons, and there's plenty of other really nice situational ones too. And then the individual shield companies can add a fair few other special rules, things like the Emperor's Chosen just for a bit of extra damage, flexibility with different traits, and the mortal wound protection, or things like Shadow Keepers offer a bunch of great stuff too, a Fight's Last Relic, an Ignore Invul's Warlord trait, the Strength debuff stratagem, and a bit of extra melee defense as well with their -1 attacks thing. It doesn't end there though, they get very cheap interrupts, a +1 to wound against hard targets which really helps out their mid-strength weapons, and a bunch of other strats and kit which can help them out against certain opponents. I think there's no question that Custodes are just generally all-round strong, but I think there are definitely some ways that you can build to counter them a bit. They really don't have much of a variety of defensive profiles. In general, if you're taking anti-tank weapons, you're going to do quite well against them. Particularly, I think anything that's either damage 3 or damage D3+3 is going to have great value against them. Damage 3 things are going to be really efficient into the standard Custodian Guard. Damage D3+3 is going to still be great against them, but also be very good against things like jet bikes or the dreadnoughts. If you think that you're going into a event or meta where there's going to be loads of Custodians about, I'd load up on as many of those as possible if you do have efficient sources of them in your codex. They do have the potential to struggle a bit against anything that's -1 damage as well. A lot of their auric weapons are damaged too. The same goes for quite a lot of their Guardian Spear style shooting. While they're still going to be good against just about anything in combat, they'll certainly take a bit longer to chew through damage -1 things, particularly if you've managed to deplete their squads a bit first. Besides the bikes and things, they also have the potential to be a bit slow once they're on the board, might struggle a bit more with secondaries and actions and things, but it's really not going to be the biggest issue for them on primary objectives, just stomping onto the ones in the midfield and holding them against all comers. Here's just one example of a well-built Custodians list that took down a grand tournament this past weekend. Here's an Emperor's Chosen battalion run by Ben Hampshire, who used it to take down the Leodis Games GT, an excellent gaming store in Leeds if you get the chance to go. I think the list is a really good example of what makes Custodians strong in 9th, with a lot of the best stuff that the Codex and Forge World has to offer. There are those 3 characters that I mentioned earlier, Mr. Valoris and the Shield Captains in Terminator armour and on the jet bike, the Terminator one having that very scary Praetorian plates plus impregnable mind for a bit of psychic denial, and the Dawn Eagle jet bike one is super stacked, taking superior creation and tip of the spear for extra damage and defence, and also the Castellan's Mark and Auric Exemplar as well, layering the extra Warlord trait via Victor of the Blood games. Auric Exemplar is the damage one for extra attacks per slain models, and the Castellan's Mark allows you to redeploy units pre-game, pretty much always a good thing in 9th, allowing a better alpha strike or keeping your units safe. Otherwise, for the troops, there's a unit of Custodian Guard with the shields, great for midfield objectives and slogging forward with the characters, 5 Prosecutors for cheap objective holding or some psychic defence, 1 unit of Sagittarium Custodians, which could be used a bit further back for a bit of ranged threats while holding points, and a squad of Wardens with the Guardian Spears, who allow some character protection and keeping those hideously scary characters safe. There's then 2 units of 3 Virtus Praetors with the Salvo Launchers, hideous threats at range against heavies and in melee against just about anything, 2 of the very cool looking Contemptor Achilles Dreadnoughts with the Lastrum Bolters and the enormous Achilles Dread Spear, again very solid at range and in melee, and for a bit of more generalist longer range fire support, there's a Caladius Grav Tank with Arachnus Heavy Blade Cannons. Always nice to have a bit of volume fire to run around and hopefully gun down some far-flung threats that it doesn't make the sense to try and charge. Overall, it just looks hideously scary. Just about every unit is a threat that the opponent can't really ignore. A whole ton of big damage dealers and some really durable objective holders with OBSEC. In any case, just seems like a good example of units the Custodians are using to do well at the moment, and in the hands of a good general, not really too surprising to see it landing a grand tournament win. Moving on though to the impetuous young race challenging the Custodians and their dominance, let's talk about the Tau Empire and why they're also killing it on the competitive field. As we know, Tau in 9th edition have been really underwhelming for a really long time now, having to play some really specific builds and combos just to compete on any level, and they've very rapidly gone from being borderline unplayable on any sort of competitive level to one of the strongest factions in the entire game. Not only that, but some of their strongest units are the most iconic ones the Tau have to offer, seeing things like Crisis Suits, Broadsides, Fire Warriors, Ethereals and Commanders all being very playable certainly would draw a lot of people back to play them who already have those models. In any case, the vast majority of the Tau Codex now is really strong. I'd say almost everything's basically usable, but some things certainly stick out far more than others. Battlesuit Commanders have multiple great builds. They can deal massive damage in their own right with things like Precision of the Hunter, maybe combined with that melee commander build, or just be awesome support pieces, maybe doing things like making Crisis Suits ignore modifiers, allowing them to fall back, or using great Warlord traits like that one for rerolling wounds at close range. Shadow Sun herself is certainly usable as well. Full rerolls to hit never hurt a gun line. Breaches in Devilfish can be an interesting option for disembarking after moving and claiming objectives in a volley of pulse shots. Crisis Suits are just a great all-round unit, very flexible, fairly fast, huge buffs available, and can be spec'd for a whole bunch of different roles, either just deep striking and dealing direct damage, maybe bullying down enemy elites with plasma rifles and cyclic ion blasters, or even going for a massive ignores line of sight approach with a bunch of air-bursting fragmentation projectors. A few drones, shield generators and support systems can even make them really quite tough to take out. Broadsides are just a massively efficient gun line, those heavy rail rifles are amazing against tanks, plus a bunch of smart missiles didn't hurt either. Stealth Suits provide some okay screening, a bit of anti-infantry, and first turn deep strike via a homing beacon. Ethereals are also basically an auto-include unit. We did talk about them on the channel recently, but giving out a 5+ feel no pain and command point farming, that's pretty insane value for less than 100 points. Kroot, Vespid and Kroot Hounds all do the screening thing pretty well and can also help out with objectives and actions. And the really big gun threats, things like Hammerhead's Long Strike or Storm Surge, just having the potential for a massive one-shot kill mechanic, could be absolutely terrifying for certain enemy heavies, particularly when it cuts straight through invuls or can do with a stratagem. Again, it's a case of very efficient units backed up by awesome buffs. Perhaps one of the biggest and most obvious things that really makes them strong though is the sheer amount of Ignor's line of sight shooting that they can put out. It's really easy just to wind up fielding a whole bunch of Ignor's line of sight weapons almost by accident in the Tau list, just taking a bunch of smart missiles along and a few air-bursting fragmentation projectors. When it reaches enough of a critical mass, it can be pretty guaranteed that you're just going to hoover up any infantry squads in the midfield, even if you can't necessarily even draw a line of sight to them. The Codex also has a bunch of really easy to access buffs for shooting, things like commander buffs and warlord traits as we mentioned, but also a couple of units focusing fire for AP-1, marker lights of course, Montcar for vast mobility and damage up close, and then a bunch of the Sept specific stuff as well, Tau Sept's +1 to wound stratagem, the innate rerolls, characters such as Shadow Sun or Dark Strider, and it's perhaps worth mentioning their excellent vectored retro thruster relic as well, the one that can basically let your commander run away when the opponent tries to charge them. Farsight enclaves also seem particularly popular, particularly in a slightly weird allied world configuration. They basically get a big damage boost up close with automatic marker lights, a great crisis suit deep strike and destroy everything stratagem for rerolls to hit and wound, and if you field them as an allied world, you lose their double commander benefit and Farsight himself, but you can actually take those really good ethereals. Perhaps a bit of an unintended loophole there that was left by the rules writers. In general, just with the sheer amount of firepower, they're always going to be very scary, and perhaps particularly so because they're able to do it while moving so fast, or just plain shooting straight out of line of sight. I think perhaps one of their biggest issues might just be if you've got units that can weather the firestorm, take objectives fairly early, and be ready to push them straight off if the Tau come up. Obviously, for the most part, Tau really don't like melee that much, though they do have a few units that can fight well, and a few ways to mitigate its impact, such as Overwatch, the repulsor impact field, or just battlesuits blazing away in combat. In general, if playing Tau, I'd typically not be wanting to take either very light infantry squads that are just going to get hoovered up by smart missiles, or too much reliance on heavy vehicles, things that are going to be easy prey for things like railguns, storm surges, or broadsides with heavy rail rifles. Perhaps a bunch of medium infantry, or pop-up threats, or cheap transport vehicles might not be the worst way to go against Tau. It certainly seems that Custodes don't tend to do too badly against them, what with their sheer durability and melee threats to keep them off central objectives. Just for one example of the Tau list coming together, here's a list that had already featured on the channel by Vic VJ, who used it to take second at the Beachhead Brawl tournament, and though his pips at the post was pretty much equally impressive, going completely undefeated. The list is going very commander heavy, with 2 Tau Sept patrols and a Supreme Command attachment, allowing you to field 3 different commanders, an XV8 commander with a bunch of Ignor's line of sight shooting, Ignor's cover, an exemplar of Montcar for the reroll wounds, a Cold Star commander with a whole bunch of shots with a DW02 burst cannon, the high output one, those maneuvering thrusters to jump away when charged, and precision of the hunter for rerolls to hit and wounds. Finally, for the commanders, there's Commander Shadow Sun, with exemplar of Cao Yon to redeploy a unit. There's also the ubiquitous Ethereal, the one with Wisdom of the Guides, Sense of Stone, and the Humble Stave to get those command points and 5+ Feel No Pain very reliably. In general, they're all buffing 2 big units of Crisis Suits and 1 unit of Broadsides. In general, the Crisis Suits mainly take Cyclic Ion Blasters and Plasma Rifles, perhaps some of the better all-rounders. One squad takes an extra Plasma Rifle and the other a Flamer. For the most part, they're taking Shield Generators, and then are backed up by a few Shield Drones and Marker Drones to pad the unit out and take some ablative shots. There's then that unit of Broadsides with the Heavy Rail Rifles, Smart Missile Systems, and the Auto Wounds on 6s with ATS. Again, they're very well protected by a layer of drones. Finally, for objectives and utility, there's a unit of Screening Stealth Suit with a homing beacon, so you could have one of those big Crisis Bombs deep strike in turn 1 if you wanted, 2 units of 10 Fire Warriors with the Pulse Rifles for some objective work, 4 Marker Drones, and 1 unit of 5 Stingwings, a very nice unit for objectives and actions. A very cool list with a whole bunch of the strong combos on display. It does seem that there's maybe a bit more variety in how people are choosing to play Tau though. Almost all of them make use of at least a fair few Crisis Suits and Commanders, but you can also mix in a bunch of other interesting things, Storm Surges, Devilfish Breachers, more Broadsides, or all manner of other things. So overall, it really is looking like Custodes and Tau are going to be the armies to beat for some time. I strongly suspect that whenever we get a next balance update, both of these armies are going to take big hits. Until then though, look forward to hearing any other insights that you have down in the comments, particularly any other tips or tactics for defeating either Tau or Custodes, certainly could be useful in the meantime. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll certainly keep the regular 40k things coming most days. Looking forward to plenty more 40k analysis videos in the future. Finally, if you have been watching the videos on the channel quite a bit and you'd like to help keep them coming, I would just like to mention one way in which you can help do so, which is the Auspex Tactics Patreon page down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.